The sword is pointed at the young man's throat, and yet he's smiling. Not nervous, not panicking, calm, the picture of serenity. But why? That's the question plaguing the minds of the Sicilian pirates who've just boarded a small boat sailing across the Aegean Sea. It's 75 BCE, and out here, the pirates, brutal men, no stranger to bloodshed, rule the waves. Anyone who fights back gets their throat slit, then dumped into the cold, indifferent sea. The pirates tear through the ship, stripping the cabin and the hold of anything valuable. Then it's time for the next problem. What to do with the survivors? Most are unremarkable, forgettable, but not him. The young man shows no fear. If anything, he looks bored. But there's something about him. He carries himself with a noble bearing. It's impossible to ignore, and men like that are worth money.
"Think we'd get as many as 20 talents for this little lout?"
one of the pirates says aloud. That just makes the boy laugh.
20? A bargain. Do you wish to disrespect me? Ask for 50 at least, or you'll hurt my feelings.
Never in all their years at sea had they seen anything like this. A kidnapping victim requests a raise of his ransom, but a pirate never turns down a good payday, so the deal is struck. The rest of the people on board are sent back to the mainland to come up with the money. What the pirates don't realize is that they've just signed their own death warrants. They drag the boy onto their craft and push off, telling him that if he tries to escape, they'll run him through. That doesn't seem to bother him either. In fact, he criticizes them for interrupting his trip to Rhodes, where he planned to study oration. Not that the pirates thought he needed lessons. The boy could talk. And that's not all. He gives speeches and performs poetry. If any of them fail to clap, he calls them an illiterate fool. He treats them like servants, ordering them around and telling them to be quiet when he wants to sleep. He takes part in their drinking and games and jokes like he's a member of the crew. Some of the pirates even find him a little charming. Except when he says,
"You know, when my men capture you, I'm going to have you crucified."
They all try to laugh. The kid has a sick sense of humor. At this point, I should probably mention the young man's name. Julius Caesar. And Caesar, for all his faults, is a man who keeps his promises. Not long after his release and the capture of the pirates, he sat back and watched with a smile on his face. His men were ruthless. Throats were slit, nails hammered into hands and feet, crucifixes raised, and they were hanged, exposing their bruised and beaten bodies to the elements, all for the crime of inconveniencing Caesar. Some say revenge is a dish best served cold, but as we take our forward march from ancient times to the modern day, you'll soon discover that it's actually a dish best served with maximum brutality. And what Caesar did to those unlucky pirates was little more than an appetizer. Back in 1868, when young Frank Eaton was only 8 years old, his father, an avowed abolitionist, was killed by 6 gunmen. And these weren't just Old West bandits. They were self-appointed regulators, ex-members of Confederate militia groups looking to soothe the shame of a lost war through vigilante murders. Eaton's dad was just one more victim of their racially motivated killing spree. Not long after his father's murder, a friend of his father took young Frank by the shoulders and said,
"My boy, may an old man's curse rest upon you if you do not try to avenge your father."
That father's friend then introduced him into the world of gunplay. It wasn't long before he was headed off to Fort Gibson to polish his skills, where he was said to be competing at the level of the fort's best marksman at 15 years old. This got him the iconic nickname Pistol Pete. In the decade and change that followed, he hunted the 5 surviving men who killed his father and expertly gunned them down. Deciding he had a knack for all this, he decided to become a sheriff and lived to the ripe old age of 97. The Indian freedom fighter Udham Singh had a hard childhood, losing most of his family at a young age before being admitted to an orphanage. Eventually, he joined the armed forces of the British Empire just in time for World War I, hoping that it'd help lift him out of poverty. Instead, all it did was radicalize him against the British, seeing them as tyrannical rulers who cared little for the lives of their subjects in Southeast Asia. It prepared him for a life of activism. He never once imagined it'd someday lead to him becoming an assassin. In 1919, he was among the 10,000 people protesting the Rowlatt Act. a law that let the British try political cases without a jury. Udham was handing out water to the crowd when Reginald Dyer, a British officer working crowd control at the protest, ordered his troops to cordon off the area and massacre everyone inside. Udham only barely escaped that hell of blood and bullets with his life when he heard the British Lieutenant Governor of Punjab, Michael O'Dwyer, emphatically endorse the mass killing. He knew what had to be done. But to get access to the man, he'd need to be extremely patient. Udham would live a global life of revolution, building support for causes against the interests of the oppressive and cruel British Raj. He spent some time in prison for sedition, during which Reginald Dyer, the man who'd ordered the massacre on the ground, died of natural causes. But O'Dwyer was still out there, and when Udham was released from prison, he didn't intend to let him get away with what he did. On March 13, 1940, moments after Michael O'Dwyer gave a speech in London, Udham approached and gunned him down with a concealed pistol. It took 21 years and cost Udham his life when he was subsequently tried and executed for the murder, but he'd avenged the massacre that had changed his life forever. He's widely seen as a hero across India today. What's worse than a single assassin? How about an entire town coming for you? On July 10, 1981, Ken Rex McElroy finished his drink at a bar in Skidmore, Missouri. He bought a six-pack of beer and headed to his truck outside, where his wife, Trina, was waiting in the passenger seat. It wasn't a cold and lonely night. In fact, there was a crowd of 46 locals out there, all in plain view of the truck. Suddenly, gunfire broke out. Rounds from multiple weapons peppered the truck, and 2 bullets, each a different caliber, pierced the windshield, fatally striking Ken and spraying Trina with his blood. And despite all those witnesses, not a single person stepped forward to identify a shooter. Over 40 years later, there still hasn't been a single person charged with Ken's murder. Naturally, you're probably wondering how this was possible. Did the killer figure out how to turn invisible before firing a gun in each hand like a hero in a John Woo movie? It's actually much simpler than that. Ken McElroy was a man that the entire town of Skidmore, Missouri wanted dead, and not a single person would ever want to punish the people who killed him. He was known locally as the town bully, and he had a rap sheet that had backed that reputation up. He'd been indicted 21 times for various crimes, from multiple offenses of a sexual nature to physical assault, arson, animal cruelty, burglary, and even cattle rustling. But none of it stuck, except the crime that would set his death in motion: the assault of a beloved 70-year-old grocer, whom Ken threatened and non-fatally shot with a shotgun. When Ken's hearing was delayed, the rest of the town convened to discuss how they could protect themselves from his wrath. Whether the shooting of Ken McElroy was planned there or was some mutual crime of passion, we'll never know. What we do know is that you could count the people who'd mourn the man on one hand and still have plenty of fingers left over. It would take a true monster to be even more hated than a man like Ken McElroy, but Akku Yadav certainly tried to take the title. Short of war crimes and genocide, it's easier to list the crimes that Akku didn't commit than the ones he did. A serial offender whose treatment, especially against women, is enough to make someone physically sick. He always managed to skirt consequences thanks to his other vocation, a successful gangster running bribery and extortion rackets, with the local police seemingly in his pocket. He was also, technically, a serial killer, responsible for at least 3 murders. Much like Ken McElroy, Akku was a monster and a bully. And also much like Ken McElroy, he was about to realize that there's only so far that you can push people before they push back. In 2004, Akku's luck ran out when a woman named Usha Narayane fought back against Akku and his gang's attempts at intimidation. Her courage inspired others to rise up. Soon, an angry mob was throwing burning torches at Akku's house until it lay in a smoldering wreck. He was so terrified that he fled to the police to be arrested for his own protection, but that plan didn't exactly pan out either. A confident Akku swaggered into the Nagpur district court, so certain that his institutional power would protect him. He'd gotten away with it every time before, so why not now? But as he gloated to the crowd about how untouchable he was, the mood changed. Hundreds of women were parading through the streets, and now they were flooding into the courtroom. But their hands weren't full of protest signs and megaphones. They were holding knives, stones, and chili powder. The latter two were soon raining down on the cops guarding Akku, and they soon fled, leaving the monstrous man undefended. The women descended on him as he cowered, getting stones and chili powder thrown into his eyes. And in a pleasing sense of circularity for this video, they gave him the same treatment the mob of senators gave Julius Caesar, except this time, in addition to stabbing him 70 times, they also took his manhood. His last words were, "Forgive me, I won't do it again," as he was butchered. And you know, he was right. Akku Yadav died 15 minutes later on the cold, blood-splattered marble of the courtroom. Of his 200 female killers, 21 were arrested. All claimed responsibility in the streets, but pleaded not guilty in court. And due to a lack of witnesses, all were acquitted. Few rulers have been stranger or more terrifying than King Pedro of Portugal, whose love affair cut a bloody streak across the 14th century. Our tale of revenge begins in the Villa of Tears, a Portuguese mansion, in 1355. A woman waits for the return of her husband, taking care of their 3 children, when a group of masked men wielding swords stormed into the building. She begged for her life and the life of her children. She said that her husband was the prince, a powerful man who could pay them if their lives were spared. One of the assassins laughed and told her that her husband was precisely the reason that she needed to die. They stabbed and hacked until she was no more and fled into the night. The woman they'd just murdered was Inés de Castro, wife of Prince Pedro, but that hadn't always been the case. She had once been the lady-in-waiting for Pedro's former wife, Constanza of Castile, but she and Pedro had fallen in love and begun an affair. When Constanza died of natural causes, Pedro wanted to marry Inés and sought the approval of his father, the king. The thought of this disgusted his father. Inés had been born to a minor noble family from Spain, and he feared this would lead to an outsized Spanish influence on the royal Portuguese court. But the heart wants what the heart wants. Even when his father banished her, Pedro continued his affair. Eventually, with fears of it throwing off the entire royal line, Pedro's own father employed the assassins who murdered Inés. Pedro was heartbroken, but that pain soon became rage. When his father died 2 years later in 1357, he assumed the throne. His first act was to track down the assassins that had been involved in the plot to kill Inés. He found 2 of them and had them beaten and tortured, but since they had essentially ripped out his heart, he decided to return the favor. While King Pedro watched, his executioners physically forced their hands into the bodies of the assassins and tore out their still-beating hearts. Committing the world's most on-theme revenge still wasn't enough. King Pedro continued to be the world's most twisted romantic after that. When he was crowned, he ordered that Inés's corpse be dug up and clothed in royal finery. He made her his true queen, even in death, securing his heir's legitimacy. All the noblemen of his court were made to kiss her decayed hand, as was custom in coronations of the time. 250 years earlier, in the aftermath of the Battle of Claydon, 1014, the valley between the towering Belasica and Ograzden mountains ran red. Blood soaked the earth. Both sides have experienced terrible suffering and loss, but one is far worse off. The Bulgars of Bulgaria were crushed beneath the unstoppable force of the Byzantine army, commanded by the mighty Emperor Basil II. It's the end of a bloody, protracted feud between Basil and the Bulgar leader, Tsar Samuel. Basil strode through the blood and filth as his men collected the survivors as prisoners. After this battle, his nickname will forever be the Bulgar Slayer. But it isn't the slain soldiers that will give him a notorious place in history, it's what he does to the survivors. You see, this was the decisive point in a truly bitter war, one that had killed one of Basil's favorite military commanders. Basil didn't want to vanquish, but to drive and humiliate his opponents. And he had just the way to do it. He had the remaining soldiers, by some counts as many as 15,000 Bulgars, split into groups of 100. 99 of each group of 100 soldiers, he ordered his men to gouge out their eyes with red-hot pokers, rendering them blind. The 100th soldier of each contingent would have only one eye taken, so that they could lead their blinded compatriots back to the capital city for display to Tsar Samuel. This revenge turned out to be twofold, and perhaps one of the most successful pieces of psychological warfare in military history. When the mutilated remains of his army returned to his palace, Samuel was reportedly so horrified by what he saw that he had a heart attack and died 2 days later. While he's seen as a Greek national hero, Basil II is despised by Bulgarians to this day. Mariya Oktyabrskaya's own brutal revenge quest unfolded in the 1940s. At first, when World War II plunged the world into chaos, Mariya wasn't a soldier, just the wife of one. But that didn't mean she didn't have the skills for warfare. After marrying then military cadet Ilya Fedotovich Ryadnenko in 1925, she trained in all the reserve force skills, from marksmanship to driving military vehicles. Little did she know how valuable all that knowledge would be in getting her brutal revenge. In 1941, she was forcibly evacuated when the Nazis began pressing eastward, separated from her husband, who was now fighting on the front lines. She wouldn't learn that he'd died in the Battle of Kiev until 1943, and then she had nothing to lose. She was in her late 30s, suffering from spinal tuberculosis that stopped her from ever enlisting through official channels. But she worked hard, sold all of her material possessions, cobbled together 50,000 rubles, and donated them to the army to build a T-34 tank. She then sent a letter to Joseph Stalin himself, requesting permission to drive the tank to kill fascist dogs on behalf of her country in a tank that she would call Fighting Girlfriend. Against all odds, the State Defense Committee agreed. Mariya took to the battlefield in Fighting Girlfriend, sharing the tank's cabin with Commander Pyotr Chebotko, gunner Gennady Yasko, and radio operator Mikhail Galkin. Not only did many of the Nazi soldiers who killed her husband die under her tank, she also showed bravery by leaving it to make emergency repairs under heavy fire on more than one occasion. She wrote a letter to her sister at some point during all this, which read in part, "I've had my baptism by fire. I beat them. Sometimes I'm so angry I can't even breathe." Her bravery and devil-may-care attitude sadly led to her death in 1944, after another one of her daring mid-battle tank repairs. She was hit by shell fragments and fell into a coma, never to wake again. But she spilled a lot more blood from the Nazis than they ever spilled from her. Over 1,000 years earlier, Prince Ihor of Kiev has just made the worst decision of his life. As ruler of the Rus, he sees it as his right to collect tribute from the many tribes and factions under him, including the Slavic Drevlians, whom they'd recently bested in a bloody war. But his greed has gotten the better of him. He's returned to their territory for the second time in a month to extort them. This time, he has an arrogantly small group of soldiers to back him up. He and his puny warband are quickly overwhelmed by the Drevlian forces on their home territory. The prince can only watch in horror as they hack his men to death, but he can't help but wonder why he's not getting the same treatment. Maybe, like Caesar, they plan to ransom him for the riches he'd spent years extorting them for. But no, he's not that lucky. First, they beat him senseless. Then they drag him out to a clearing of birch trees where more of the Drevlian soldiers are waiting. They do something strange, bending over two of the largest birches and holding them down in place. Then, they begin tying his ankles to the tips of each birch tree. It's at that moment Prince Ihor realizes what's going to happen to him. He cries and begs, as any sane person would. He tells them of his beloved wife Olga and his infant son who would suffer for his absence. But the Drevlians don't care. After all, it's not like he'd ever shown the same sympathy to them. When the ropes are firmly in place, the several men let go of the birch trees they've been holding down, causing them to whip up and pull Ihor's ankles in two different directions. And just like that, Ihor is half the man he used to be. But this is not the story of the Drevlians' revenge on Ihor. Oh no. It's about what his widow Olga did to the Drevlians in response. Grand Princess Olga of Kiev doesn't take the death of her husband lightly. As the regent ruler of the kingdom following his demise, she immediately begins plotting far stickier ends for everyone that took her beloved Ihor from her and left her child without a father. Until he was old enough to rule, it would be her job to see that justice was done. And the Drevlians gave her a fantastic opportunity. Not long after ripping her husband in half, they sent a delegation to recommend that Olga marry the Drevlian prince to unite their kingdoms. She sent back a response that said, in part, "Your proposal is pleasing to me. Indeed, my husband cannot rise again from the dead, but I desire to honor you tomorrow in the presence of my people." And honor them she does. When the Drevlian boats arrive, the Rus people lift them from the ground and parade them through the streets like a grand celebration, until they see the deep trench her men have dug on the edge of town. When they reach it, the Drevlian men are thrown inside and buried alive. The last words they ever hear are Olga saying,
"Do you find the honor to your taste?"
And Olga still has plenty of honor to dispense. While the last contingent of Drevlians was still suffocating under hundreds of pounds of hard-packed dirt, she penned a letter to Prince Mal, the leader who sought her hand. She told him to send his best men for her to throw them a lavish dinner. Prince Mal was so excited that his offer had seemingly been accepted, he didn't even stop to consider how much of a red flag this was. When the prince's most distinguished underlings arrived, they were tired and filthy from the long trip. Soup was to be on the menu tonight, but first, the Grand Princess offered the men the chance to relax in their luxury bathhouse, with a tub prepared for each of them. Once they were all inside, Olga's men locked and barricaded the doors and set the place alight. Still, Olga didn't believe that her husband's blood debt had been adequately repaid. She advanced on Drevlian territory before news of either of the slaughters could reach Prince Mal. She asked him and his men to pull together a lavish funeral host in honor of Ihor, so she could properly move on before marrying the Drevlian prince. Mead was drawn from all across the Drevlian kingdom to facilitate such a feast. It was ready by the time Grand Princess Olga arrived, her banners fluttering in the night. Anyone who was paying attention would notice that Olga and her men were nursing their drinks while the exhausted Drevlians drained their cups. A few hours into the night, the Drevlian soldiers were almost blind drunk, but some of them may still have noticed the glint of Rus swords unsheathing. The funeral feast soon became the prelude to many other funerals, as Olga's army massacred every last Drevlian in attendance. Her vengeance continued for another year, as she mustered up an even larger army to wipe out the last of the Drevlians in a series of bloody battles. The holdout was Korostan, the heavily fortified Drevlian capital. Hoping to end things peacefully, she sent them a letter saying, "Why do you persist in holding out? All your cities have surrendered to me and submitted to tribute, so that the inhabitants now cultivate their fields and their lands in peace. But you had rather die of hunger without submitting to tribute." And what was her tribute? 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from every home in Korostan. It looked like a good deal, at least to anyone who hadn't noticed that all of Grand Princess Olga's deals seemed perfect until the sword fell. The birds were gathered and presented as tribute. Olga accepted them graciously, then tied cloth and sulfur to their wings and set them alight. But when the flaming birds were released, they flew back to their nests in Korostan, setting the city of mostly wooden buildings completely ablaze. And as thousands fled, Olga and her soldiers slaughtered almost all of them and turned the survivors into slaves. So many thousands had died because of the murder of one unfortunate prince. When it comes to the most brutal revenge stories in history, though, no one can hold a candle to the viciousness of Genghis Khan, the ruler of the Mongol Empire. The Khan to end all Khans showed exactly why in 1219, when a hit to his personal pride led to the revenge-driven destruction of an entire empire. It began with the best of intentions on the Mongol emperor's part. He wanted to establish friendly trade relations with the Khwarezmian Empire, a Muslim state that spans much of present-day Iran, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. Their territory was less than half the size of what the Mongols had already conquered, so they were fortunate to receive such generous terms from a ruler known for his merciless campaigns. Genghis recruited a caravan of Muslim merchants and gave them his message and terms to deliver to Shah Ala-ad-Din Muhammad II, the empire's ruler. But it was never to be. When the merchants passed through the city of Otrar, the local governor, Inalshuk, had the group arrested as spies. They were swiftly tortured and executed. One of them managed to escape, though, and run across the perilous desert back to Genghis. An important thing to know about Mongol culture is that they considered traveling merchants, diplomats, and envoys to be an almost sacred class of people. To lay a hand on one was a grave insult against the person who sent them. It wouldn't have surprised anyone if Genghis Khan had decided to go scorched earth on the entire empire there and then, but against all odds, he continued to take the diplomatic route with the Khwarezmian Empire. He sent another envoy straight to Shah Muhammad II with 2 simple demands: that the governor of Otrar be punished for his crime, and that he be compensated for the loss of life and his property. That didn't happen. The Shah had actually been the one who told the governor to arrest and execute the merchants the first time around. This time, he arrested everyone who'd arrived to deliver him the message. The lesser envoys had their beards forcibly shaved off, a huge insult against Mongol masculinity of the time. He then also beheaded the lead envoy and sent his severed head back to Genghis. This may have been the most foolish decision that anyone in the entire Khwarezmian Empire had ever made. Genghis decided it would be better to show why he'd become the most feared ruler the world had ever known. Instead of envoys, he sent an army of tens of thousands. They flooded the streets of Otrar, massacring everyone in sight and soon capturing the governor. He was forced to his knees by Mongol soldiers and had molten metal poured into his eyes, mouth, and ears, perhaps to mock him for his greed in robbing the merchants he executed. This was really just the shot across the bow for what would become the full-scale invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire. Millions perished as the Mongol army pillaged and conquered, and all of this could have been avoided if the Shah had been a better host. Genghis Khan proved that absolute unapologetic brutality was the ultimate weapon of the ancient world. But long before the Mongols swept across Asia, an entire society was engineered from birth to do nothing but kill and die for the state. If you want to know what it was actually like to survive the psychological and physical hell of the Spartan 300, click the video on your screen right now. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and tell a friend. It really does help to make more of these videos happen. And be sure to tell me in the comments where we should go next on Dr. Bob's Brutal History.